Coming up, a review an appellate court ruling that suggests the COVID vaccine might not qualify as a vaccine. Who knew? And the editor of the National Pulse, Raheem Kassam, joins me. We're going to talk about Hunter Biden. We're going to talk about lawfare, Steve Bannon, and other issues in the news. Hey, if you're watching on Rumble or listening on Apple, Google, or Spotify, please subscribe to my channel. This is the Dinesh D'Souza podcast.
America needs this voice. The times are crazy. In a time of confusion, division, and lies, we need a brave voice of reason, understanding, and truth. This is the Dinesh D'Souza podcast.
Hey, are you ready to lose weight but not sure where to start? I understand. Debbie and I were right where you are a year and a half ago. Let me tell you why we chose PhD Weight Loss and Nutrition, and I so highly recommend their program. First, Dr. Ashley Lucas has her PhD in chronic disease and sports nutrition. Her program is based on years of research and is science-based. Second, the PhD program starts with nutrition, but it's so much more. They know that 90% of permanent change comes from the mind. They work on eliminating the reason you gain this weight in the first place. There are no shortcuts, no pills, no injections, just solid science-based nutrition and behavior change. And finally, and most importantly, I lost 27 pounds, Debbie lost 25. We haven't gained a pound back. The best thing about this program is they have an 85% success rate of their clients maintaining their weight loss for life. This is the key. They provide elevated maintenance support for you through the PhD alumni community, which will provide you the support you need to keep this weight loss for life. So if you're ready to lose weight for the last time, call 864-644-1900 to get started. You can also go online at myphdweightloss.com. Do what we did, what hundreds of my viewers and listeners have done. Call today. That's 864-644-1900. We recently had some monumental news that not many people are talking about. For the first time in our history, the interest we pay on the national debt surpassed every individual budget item except Social Security. That's right. The U.S. now spends more on interest than on national defense or even Medicare. And it's only getting worse as big government continues to spend like drunken sailors or worse. Now, this is why savvy investors, central banks, and concerned savers are turning to gold, something not tied to the inflated U.S. dollar. You can do that too with the help of Birch Gold. For over 20 years, Birch Gold Group has helped thousands of Americans protect their savings by converting an IRA or 401k into an IRA in physical gold. To learn more, text Dinesh to 989898. You get a free information kit. It is just information, no obligation. Birch Gold has earned my trust with their education-first approach, their thousands of happy customers, and their countless five-star reviews, which is why I buy my gold from Birch Gold. Protect your savings. Text Dinesh to 989898 today. Some very gratifying news, legal news out of California on COVID and COVID vaccines. So there is an ongoing lawsuit against the Los Angeles Unified School District for having imposed a COVID vaccine mandate on all employees, on teachers, on school staff. And this lawsuit went to the lower court, the district court, and the district court threw it out. The district court said, number one, the vaccine mandate no longer exists, and therefore, hey, the issue is moot. And number two, there is a precedent case called Jacobson, which says that you can have these kind of mandates when they are related to a legitimate government interest. And what's the government interest? Well, the government interest is that when you're dealing with previous vaccines, the government would say, well, we have an interest in preventing, for example, smallpox. So we have an interest in preventing the spread of these infectious diseases, particularly in schools. It's not just a matter of protecting your child. It's a matter of protecting someone who has the disease from infecting others. So we're not just doing this for your own good, we're doing it also to protect other children from being exposed to these diseases. This is the Jacobson precedent. And the district court said, yeah, if the government says that there's a legitimate interest, we're inclined to agree. And moreover, just as the smallpox vaccine prevents the spread of smallpox, we are relying on the government to say that the COVID vaccine is, quote, safe and effective, and it helps to prevent the spread of COVID. But here is where the Ninth Court of Appeals comes in and overturns the district court. And the Ninth Court of Appeals says, number one, we don't believe the Los Angeles School District when they say, yes, we know that they have suspended the vaccine mandate, but they specifically reserve the right to reimpose it. And one of the tactics that's being used by some of these bureaucratic organizations is if you sue them, they drop the policy. And then when you drop the lawsuit, they reinstate the policy. So they go back and forth on this to avoid exposure to litigation. And the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals is on this. They go, yeah, they can, as long as they can reinstate it, this litigation needs to go forward. And so they overturn the dismissal of the case by the district court. And then the Court of Appeals gets to the heart of the matter. And they say that even though the CDC and the government tells us that these vaccines are, quote, safe and effective, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals goes, effective for what? Is it effective in stopping you from getting COVID? No. Is it effective in preventing you from giving COVID to someone else? No. So in other words, while the higher court is not a, quote, a decider of fact, they're saying that this is not a traditional vaccine. You can call it a treatment if you want, but what is a vaccine? Well, a vaccine for tuberculosis prevents you from getting tuberculosis. A vaccine for smallpox, you don't get smallpox. So obviously the COVID vaccine does not measure up or match up to what the definition is of a vaccine. And so the Court of Appeals says just because the government says in generic terms it's safe and effective, that doesn't mean that that's true. In fact, the court goes, we have every reason to believe it's false because we know that people who have taken the vaccine do get COVID. In fact, we have one of them sitting in this exact room. Now, I have never had COVID, so you can easily guess who the other suspect is. But Debbie will testify, yeah, I took the vaccine and whoops, not only did I get COVID, I got COVID shortly after taking the vaccine. Now, Debbie is not saying, and I'm not saying, that she got COVID from the vaccine, but what she is saying is the vaccine did not prevent her from getting COVID, and that is a fact. And the Ninth Circuit Court knows this fact, and so they say very interestingly that this Jacobson case does not apply. I'm now quoting, this misapplies Jacobson. Jacobson held that mandatory vaccinations were rationally related to, quote, preventing the spread of smallpox. And that was not the case with COVID. The vaccine does not prevent the spread of COVID. If it did, people who took the vaccine would not be getting or giving anybody COVID. Now, there was a statement, interestingly, from Jackie Goldberg, who is the head of the LA school board, and she says that while the virus is now, quote, an endemic, it's no longer a pandemic, it's endemic, it's milder. She says that she did not, quote, regret imposing the mandate for one moment, not 30 seconds, not one tiny bit. But she did say that a year ago when the vote came up to repeal, she did, quote, reluctantly vote to repeal the mandate. The point I want to make here is that these are people with a tyrannical sensibility. They feel like they are the adjudicators and arbitrators of the public good. They love imposing coercion and control on other people. And these people are now all through our society. So we've got to remember that these forces of tyranny, it's not like you've got some single dictator sitting around with an overcoat. You've got little tyrants throughout the society. They're in academia, they're in the media, and they push for different types of control. In the media, it's censorship. In academia, it's speech codes. In the LA Unified School District, it's COVID vaccine mandates. They not only want to decide for themselves what they should do, They want to tell you how to live and what you should do. And what the court is basically saying here is, look, it's one thing to offer a vaccine, but when you're going to mandate it, there's a much higher legal standard you have to meet. You've got to show that this vaccine is so good, is so effective, is so related to the idea of preventing the spread of the disease that you can override people's justifiable claim to be able to be able to take the vaccine or not to take it. In other words, if you want to override people's personal liberty, you have to have a very good reason. And in this case, not only was there not a very good reason, there seems to have been no reason at all. You might have heard Mike Lindell and MyPillow no longer have the support of their box stores or shopping channels the way they used to. They've been part of this cancel culture, and so they want to pass the savings directly onto you by having a $25 extravaganza. Now, when Mike started MyPillow, it was just a one-product company, only pillows, but with the help of his dedicated employees, Mike now has hundreds of products, some of which you may not even know about. To get the word out, I want to invite my viewers and listeners to check out their $25 extravaganza. 2-pack multi-use MyPillows, $25. MyPillow sandals, $25. 6-pack towel sets, $25. Brand new 4-pack dish towels, you guessed it, $25. And for the first time ever, the premium MyPillows with the all-new Giza fabric, just $25. By the way, orders over $75 will get free shipping as well. The amazing offer won't last long, so take advantage of it. Call 800-876-0227. The number again, 800-876-0227, or go to mypillow.com. Don't forget to use the promo code. It's DINESH, Dinesh. Guys, I'd like to invite you in this big election year to check out my Locals channel. It's a great way to support my work. You can become a monthly or an annual subscriber for a modest price. I post a lot of exclusive content there, including content that's censored on other social media platforms. On Locals, you get Dinesh Unchained, Dinesh Uncensored. You can also interact with me directly. I reply to your comments. I also do a weekly live Q&A on Tuesdays, 8 p.m. Eastern. No topic is off limits. I also have a movie page up there, sort of Dinesh's movie page with documentaries and feature films. 2000 Mules is up there, the latest film called Police State, and a new movie I'm working on now, which will come out in the fall. By the way, if you're an annual subscriber, you can stream and watch this movie content for free. It's included with your subscription. So check out the channel. It's dinesh.locals.com. I'd love to have you along for this great ride. Again, it's dinesh.locals.com. Guys, I'm delighted to welcome to the podcast Raheem Kassam, editor-in-chief at the National Pulse, actually former editor-in-chief of Breitbart News' London bureau, also former chief advisor to British politician Nigel Farage. You can follow him on X at Raheem Kassam and the website thenationalpulse.com. Raheem, welcome. Thanks for joining me. Big developments in Europe, not just in one country, but it seems in several. In Italy, a boost for Giorgia Meloni. Election results in France. Big blow to Emmanuel Macron, and apparently a surge for Le Pen and the so-called, well, the press likes to call it the far right. So it seems like the far right is doing pretty well across the continent. Is that true? Is that a real effect? And what are the implications?
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's something I love to talk about, by the way, because I worked in and around the European Parliament for so many years with Nigel Farage, as you just said, and there are so many different things that people fail to take into consideration when they look at how European parliamentary elections work. And I know, believe me, having been in the US now for the best part of a decade, I completely understand the eyes glazing over of so many people when they have to hear about the difference between the European Parliament and the European Commission and the European Council and the Council of Ministers and all of these different things. But all of it is to say that while there wasn't kind of a huge nationalist populist wave across Europe that splashed across Europe over these last 72 hours, there's definitely a shifting of the Overton window. There's definitely an inching towards the right. But so much of this will get tied up in the kind of bureaucratic ways of how parliamentary groups are formed in the EU and who's willing to do deals with who, and how the centrist left globalist party intends to shut out the so-called far right using arcane machinations of parliamentary procedure and so on and so forth. So I like to pull it back a little bit and just say, look, forget about who is necessarily the big winners. Who are the big losers over the last 72 hours? The socialists and the progressive left across the continent lost tons of seats, dozens and dozens of seats in the European Parliament. And of course, Emmanuel Macron, who just a couple of days ago, remember, was swanning around France with his best buddy, Sleepy Joe. And what does that tell you about the Joe Biden effect on European politics? It's either completely net neutral, and Macron was going to get humiliated in this way anyway, or it actually dragged him down even further. We're still getting numbers that will bear some of that stuff out. But for the globalist political left, for the socialist progressive left, it was a really bad 72 hours in Europe.
I mean, this seems to me to be significant because what we've seen in the last several years is the emergence of a global right to counter the global left. The left has always been to some degree global, right? If you looked at, for example, you could find, my wife's from Venezuela, parallels between Obama's rhetoric and, say, Hugo Chavez's rhetoric. So the left has a certain recognizable similarity. But if I go back a generation, as Reagan conservatives, we could find some guys in Britain who would be Thatcherites and kind of similar to Reagan. But then when you were to go to France or Germany, they're really speaking a completely different language altogether. But it looks like now from Milei in Argentina to Giorgia Meloni, you do have a recognizable global right. And do you think that that's a phenomenon here to stay?
Yeah, and they all have their sort of different quirks and different flavors, and as you say, quite literally different languages. And one of the language barriers is why a lot of the populist nationalist groups on the right have struggled to get along with each other. I remember a funny story of when I was in France once representing Steve Bannon on behalf of Bannon's group, and one of the French members of parliament was asked to speak with me, and he said in French to the guy talking to him, said, "Does he speak any French?" And he said, "No, he only speaks English. Do you speak any English?" And the member of parliament goes, "Yes, but I refuse," and walks off in the other direction. And this is the way that so many of them are. And of course, that's what makes them kind of nationalist parties, right? Very proud of their culture, their identities, their languages, and all their little quirks that come along with it. But it's also become a hindrance, especially at the European parliamentary level. It's good to see, yes, that they are starting to work together a lot more. It's something that we've pressed for over a decade now. And yes, I think it's here to stay.
You mentioned Steve Bannon, and that's a good way for me to ask you about Steve. Steve has been a very strong voice for MAGA conservatism and for Trump. Here we are just a few months from the election, and they want to toss Steve Bannon into prison. Talk about that, and talk about whether that is going to, I think we all know that this is an effort to shut Bannon up. And in fact, if I remember in the sentencing discussion with the judge, they even said, this is a guy who's been railing about the process and railing about lawfare and railing about this very court. And so we need to lock this guy up. My question is, how much is it going to hurt our team to have Bannon silenced, or will he be silenced if he's behind bars?
Yeah, look, it's not that they want to lock him up. They are locking him up. I think that is a reality that we all need to confront. That is a reality we need to face. I think come July 1st, you can expect probably a very different representation of how the War Room, his show, and his network is actually presenting information and who is presenting that. I think all of those things are currently still being worked out, but there's no doubt. I mean, it's one of the largest shows on the political right, has one of the largest and most activist audiences. That's what's, the critical part of it here. And I think that's what Biden's DOJ and their cronies really, truly fear, is not just, hey, here's a guy that gets in front of a microphone and screams, bloody murder all day long about what the globalist left is doing, but actually he gets people up off their couches, up off their seats, helps them to register for precinct strategy, helps them to register for canvassing and campaigning and go to these events and be part of the process. And, it's his phrase, his catchphrase: action, action, action. And that's what they want to stop. Yes, I think it does have an extremely harmful effect, and knowingly a willful, harmful effect on what that show and its audience are able to do between now and the election. And you also have to bear this in mind. This isn't the only legal process and only lawfare process he faces. He faces another New York court in September, where they're no doubt going to throw the book at him, just like they did with President Trump just a few weeks ago. And so, on this basis, could he be out on November the 1st? Yes. But he also may be facing a far longer sentence on a separate trial. I wouldn't put it past them.
I mean, this is really incredible. And of course, if this kind of stuff keeps happening, it's very discouraging for the right? Because it tells you that if you go out front, you're going to be shot at, so to speak. You're going to face this kind of legal fire. And there are no institutional structures, it seems, on the right to defend you, to protect you. There aren't law firms rushing to your defense and going, hey, Steve, no worries. Listen, you know what? Your legal costs will be taken care of. We've got top-notch people to defend you. It's almost like at that point you're on your own and everybody else looks the other way. And it's like, well, let's hope it doesn't happen to me. So a very discouraging situation. Let me ask you about Hunter Biden. He's up on this gun charge. I believe the case is winding to an end. We should be getting a verdict maybe as early as tomorrow. What's going to happen to Hunter Biden? Do you think he's going to get convicted and then maybe Joe Biden steps in and pardons him? Or do you think that he will beat this? Because I've seen some commentary to the effect that the jurors seem to be kind of almost in Hunter Biden's pocket. It's not something I follow closely, but I'd like to get your take on it.
Yeah, and just to come back on a previous point you were making, I don't just think it's discouraging what's happening. I think it's absolutely disgusting. And I think, for the people who have been subject to lawfare, you've known it, you've seen it. A lot of people understood this with the big IRS scandal under Obama as well, the purging of conservatives, the targeting of conservative organizations, institutions, and now people. And I keep trying to tell people as well, especially people my age, in my milieu, listen, if you think they're going to stop with Donald Trump and Steve Bannon, you got another thing coming. You don't. If this is a fight amongst the five families, you don't just take out the boss, you take out his captains too. And I think a lot of us, people like Steve and Trump will have serious amounts of resources to throw in terms of legal recourse for themselves. But for the next tier down of people, for the leaders of local groups, for the leaders of think tanks, for the leaders of activist groups, for the influencers, for the talking heads, for the analysts, they don't have that. And so it makes perfect sense for the Biden DOJ to bear down pressure on them next. And I think that is what's coming next. I think what you're looking at in the Hunter Biden trial is, yes, a situation where likely Hunter Biden will manage to get off, maybe a technicality here or there, maybe a juror here or there that is sympathetic. We've definitely seen jurors being sympathetic, having links to, and of course, the DOJ and the FBI themselves being sympathetic in the case that they're making against Hunter Biden there. However, I do also think that there is a circumstance where if they want to show that there is some equal justice under the law here, where they might try and pull the wool over people's eyes and say, no, look, Hunter Biden has to pay a fine as well for breaking the law, then I don't think Joe will try and attempt to pardon. I think he may end up actually wearing something. So, I'm not sure. I'm not certain, I'll say, where this case is going. But what I think is certain is that there isn't going to be a presidential pardon if Hunter is convicted.
A thought occurs to me based on what we were talking about a moment ago regarding Bannon and regarding the targeting of people on the right. I wonder if there is a crying need for a kind of a self-funding lawfare machine on the right. And here's kind of what I mean. It seems to me, one approach, of course, is to go to find a conservative billionaire or donor who says, all right, I'll bankroll this. But for various reasons, that's actually not that easy to do. What might be easier to do is to pick soft targets on the left. So, for example, universities systematically discriminating against whites and Asians in flagrant violation of the Supreme Court's decision. So now what you do is you start suing these universities one by one, and they've all got endowments, so they've all got a treasure trove of cash, not to mention the fact that they all have insurance companies that are going to be eager to settle these cases. And so the point is, you now create a lawfare machine on the right that is collecting money left and right from liberal institutions and then deploying those resources to be able to subsidize, or perhaps even pro bono, the other cases that have no funding, no equivalent funding machine. Do you think something like that might work?
Yeah, I think something like that might work, but it's an incredibly, I think it's a long-winded process. It requires, I mean, legal processes like that, especially if you're suing large institutions with large war chests, you're talking about sometimes years worth of litigation to even get to those points. So it's definitely a medium-term, a long-term solution to the problems we face. And frankly, Dinesh, we need every solution that we can possibly come up with here. So I'd throw the kitchen sink at this problem. I agree with you, by the way. You can't really rely on big dollar donors, billionaires. People don't like picking up other people's legal bills. I get it. That makes perfect sense. I wouldn't like it, quite frankly, either. So there has to be some level of gathering together, pooling resources to fight and stave off these repeat incursions. Because I think if the left has taught us anything over the past couple of years, is that this is not just a campaign that they're using against Donald Trump. They are intent on using this strategy from here on out. We should expect the apparatus of the state, the apparatus of the federal government to be leveled against conservatives at every single juncture that they could possibly do it. And as it stands currently, we kind of have our hands on our heads, just scratching our heads, going, I don't know what to do next.
Yeah, and I think what happens in many cases is then people are forced to take a plea, or they're forced to make admissions that they would not otherwise make. And so the left then has a massive media machine that swoops in, trumpets these legal admissions that you only made to get out of the case. And they go, see, this guy admits that there was, no election fraud, or this guy admits that, he actually tried to overturn the results in Georgia. Actually, there's really no such genuine admission. All of this is just done as a form of legalese to get out of a case. So it looks like there is a full-scale legal media strategy here, and one that the right has not come to terms with yet.
No, that's absolutely right. And definitely, the number of people that I know that sort of say, well, look, I can fight this case and it will cost me, $350,000 a year that I don't have and that my family doesn't have to fight the government for the next 5 to 10 years on these technicalities, or I can just kind of accept this slap on the wrist and be done with it. And in a lot of cases, that's what they're going for, right? They're not really aiming to lock up lower level people, but they are aiming to use them as propaganda tools, as PR victories, and to be able to signal to the wider American public that, hey, look, see, all of these people are criminals. We told you they were criminals. You shouldn't elect them back, and you certainly shouldn't elect back the person at the top of that food chain, which is Donald Trump. And that it's a demoralizing effort, quite frankly. I know so many people who have been ground into the dirt by this, and because they've got families, they've got kids, they've got mortgages, they've got livelihoods, they've got full-time jobs. They can't go back to working for the law firms that they work for. And what was their crime, Dinesh? To say, maybe some ballot boxes, at the 2020 election, maybe it's not a good idea to have unsecured bits of cardboard out on the street where people put their ballots in. Maybe the statistics don't add up. Maybe there's historic presidential precedent here when you look at the numbers, when you look at the returns, when you look at what we're expecting across swing counties, across America. None of that stuff adds up. Those things are not a crime. To have an opinion about an election is not a crime. To have an opinion, to act on that opinion even, is not a crime. But that's what it's turned into in Banana Republic America. It reminds me of these European countries, and it certainly reminds me of the Banana Republic countries around the world where they persecute and prosecute the opposition for simply having inconvenient opinions.
You couldn't be more right, guys. I've been talking to Raheem Kassam, editor-in-chief at the National Pulse. Follow him on X at Raheem Kassam, RaheemKassam, and the website, thenationalpulse.com. Raheem, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
I intend this week to finish up my discussion of the 4 British folkways that shaped America. I hope you've been enjoying it. The 4 groups we're talking about are the Puritans who moved to New England, the Cavaliers or Royalists who moved to Virginia and established the culture of the South. The Quakers, another dissident sects that established the culture of the American Midwest. Let's call it Mike Pence's America. And now finally I affectionately call them the rednecks, but historian David Hackett Fisher calls them the border people or the people of the borderlands. And these are people who moved from the borderlands of Great Britain, the borders between England and Scotland, between England and Wales, from both sides, by the way, from the English side as well as the Scottish and the Welsh side. And he says that these guys, they moved, they arrived in Philadelphia, they arrived in New Jersey, but they quickly moved into the rolling hills of the interior. Many drifted, he says, south and west along the mountains of Maryland, Virginia, and the Carolinas. They created a culture that stretches from Appalachia through the Southwest. They moved across the Mississippi River to Arkansas, Missouri, Oklahoma, and Texas. And you can find them, i.e. the rednecks, as far west as New Mexico, Arizona, and Southern California. Now, the environment to which these people came, if you go to Appalachia, you'll see rolling hills, you see valleys. It's beautiful country. And it's mountainous, and it gets a lot of rain. Temperatures tend to be kind of moderate. And it turns out this is, in fact, the environment that these people left in Europe. In other words, they came from regions that were relatively moderate in temperature, that were rainy, that had a lot of hills and valleys. So, in other words, they felt sort of at home in this part of America. However, as I mentioned, there were some warlike Indians in these territories. The Shawnee in the north, the Cherokee, the Creek, the Choctaw, the Chickasaw in the south. And so there was some pretty savage warfare between these border people and the Indians. And of course, the border people were used to warfare. They came from warfare. And so they were, in some ways, as savage, maybe you could say, as the Indians themselves. Now, the border people settle down in places, and they get to name them. And so their names, it turns out, are not like the Puritan names. They tend not to be biblical names. They tend not to be aristocratic names that you find, for example, in the American South. And they're also not Quaker names at all. So the names, by and large, are very simple. Typically, the rednecks, they name places based upon other places in England. So they take names that they're familiar with and they just transplant them. So, for example, a common name in Appalachia is Cumberland, taken exactly from the borderlands in Britain and now displaced to Maryland and displaced to the South. There's a Cumberland River in Tennessee. There's the Cumberland Mountains in Kentucky. There's a town called Cumberland in Maryland. There's a Cumberland Gap in the Appalachians. There are Cumberland counties in many states in this region. So Cumberland, they got it from England. They brought it here. They got it from Great Britain and they brought it here. The other thing is the border people like to name places after the names of people. And so it's very common to have names like Robertson or Graham or Harper or Jackson or Bryan or Lynch or Knox. So here are some names, and these are basically coming right out of this region. Harper's Ferry, Gordon's Meeting House, Jackson River, Lynch Creek, Johnston's Fork. Look at a place in Tennessee, Knoxville. Well, where does Knoxville come from? Well, it's Knoxville. It's Knox's place. It's named after a guy named Knox. Places are also named after food, like Whiskey Springs. So this is the formation of what you might call the American backcountry, and the backcountry is interesting because these are people who are sort of, you always say, facing backward. They're not pushing out to a frontier the way that people went out to the Midwest or later went out in search of gold in California. They were facing west. So that's why the historian Frederick Jackson Turner talks about the frontier, where the frontier is the edge of where you are and you keep going. But a backcountry is when you're facing east and what's behind you is the backcountry. Who are some of the people who came out of this migration? According to travelers and observers, these people were described as tall, lean, hard, angry, weather-beaten, willful, courageous, and cruel. So you may reasonably surmise that these are the qualities that come out of being constantly battered by war and occupation and conquest. Andrew Jackson comes out of this tradition. He is, in some ways, an original redneck. Sam Houston comes out of this tradition. Houston, of course, came from Tennessee, later became the governor of Texas. The Calhouns, the Polks, the Jacksons, the Houstons, these now, I shouldn't say, even though I'm loosely calling them rednecks, they were from elite families in the borderlands. And they established elite families in America. Now, when we say elite, you may go, well, what do you mean by elite, Dinesh? Is there an Appalachian elite? Yes, there is. These are often what happened is in the borderlands, in Scotland, in Ireland, in Wales, you had clans. A clan is a tribe, typically, in many cases, a tribe of people who were loosely related to each other. And some of these clans were huge. They would have 50, 100, 300 members. They were like a little army, a fighting force. Well, there was a clan leader who typically mobilized the whole clan. And that guy was actually noted not only for wealth, for owning a lot of land, but also for being a leader and for being the person who sort of mobilized that energy in the clan. Well, those people also came to America and they established leadership positions in the borderland communities. Now, interestingly, these people were very independent. They hated the government. They hated the elites. And so, for example, in the 19th century, the rednecks, if you will, they hated the abolitionists, but they also hated the big southern planters. So think about it. They're mobilizing against Puritan culture. That's where abolitionism comes. But by the way, abolitionism also comes out of the Quakers. So you've got Quaker abolitionism and you've got New England abolitionism, and the rednecks hate both. So you might think, oh wait, these are going to be guys who are going to fight on the side of the Confederacy. No. They hate the southern planters also. They look at those guys as basically rich guys that they want nothing to do with. Actually, if you think about the history of West Virginia, it's pretty illustrative. West Virginia used to be part of Virginia. So how did we get West Virginia? Well, at the time of slavery, Virginia was getting ready to secede from the Union, and the western part of the state is like, we're not okay with that. We have no interest in quitting the Union. We don't want to go fight on behalf of a bunch of slave owners. Count us out. And so what happened is West Virginia, in a sense, seceded from Virginia. Lincoln recognized West Virginia as a separate state, and it's a separate state until today. And it's a state that's dominated by, you may say, this borderland or redneck sensibility. Now, this sensibility was not admired by other people in America. By and large, missionaries, travelers who went through, you may say, redneck country would always talk about the fact these people are low, they're disgusting, they're lazy, they're sluttish, they're heathens. Not only is their lifestyle miserable, they have no intention of changing it at all. So they're happy with the way they are. They're like pigs in slop. They're like, we're content. And here's a very interesting little section on redneck vocabulary. I'll probably close on this for now and pick it up tomorrow. Rednecks don't say where. They say war. They don't say naked. They say naked. They don't say narrow. In fact, they can't say the letter W. They say narrer. It's narrer. They can't say widow. Why? Because again, it has a W. They go widder. She's a widder. They say things like, she done finished. They growed up. He done did that. He don't have none. So again, sometimes we tend to identify this with like exclusively like black vocabulary, but I think the point here is more complex. Some of the blacks got it from the rednecks. So it's not exclusively kind of a black thing at all, even though some of these phrases may be identified with Ebonics. The rednecks invented the word fixin'. She's fixing to do this. Not she's fixing dinner. That's actually okay. But she's fixing to go out. And rednecks also are very blunt in the way that they speak. Like it's not uncommon for a redneck to call his son a little shit. Bring in the little shit. I want to talk to him. Think of how odd that would be in Puritan New England. Let's bring in the little shits. No, but in redneck country, that's normal. These are people who, in a sense, live off the land. They live in log cabins. They're very earthy types of people, and they were that way also in their native country of England, and they brought those ways to America, which are recognizable. The reason Debbie is chuckling here is because they're recognizable to this day.
Some of us say it.
And Debbie goes, some of us even say those things.
Subscribe to the Dinesh D'Souza podcast on Apple, Google, and Spotify, or watch on Rumble, YouTube, and SalemNow.com.